Kate mentioned the tensions in research policy in this country and in Europe, and you, Helga, mentioned the theme of competition. So perhaps I can say something touching upon competition and tensions in my 8 minutes. Now 7 minutes and 30. And I'm glad you mentioned competition as an unforeseen effect of the establishment of European research policy. Because from the point of view of public policy analysis, European research policy is a policy like the others. The big question is to look at whether it's legitimate, whether a case can be made, and all too often, I think, in the public discourse, is somewhat taken for granted. Some skeptical economists in the past instead said there is no real foundation, no legitimacy of European research policy because we don't see the big externality like the acid rains that justify the establishment of European environmental policy. We don't see this great gaze for cooperation. We don't see the need because they said typically scientists compete. They compete for excellence, as you said, and they're not interested in Fortress Europe. Now, indeed, if you look at the facts instead of the rhetoric of policy analysis, one important effect of the establishment, especially of the European Research Council, but more generally European research policy, has been to open up to competition systems that worked on different logics, certainly not competition, maybe neo-feudal logics or hierarchic logics or patronage logics. But the fact that you said that now that there are also new member states that want to be evaluated, that want to be prominent in this, essentially has triggered an appetite for competition that at least in some of the old EU 15 and some also the new countries, members of the EU, did not exist before. So in a sense, through competition, perhaps the European research policy can find more legitimacy by showing that this is one of the effects of having established it. I want to qualify this remark by saying that when I talk very much from my personal experience. I've not done, like my colleague, any study of European research policy. So I'm a social scientist, and we know that within the European research policy, the social sciences, for good historical reasons perhaps, but are a fraction of the total initiative on research policy. And perhaps I can only refer to my personal experience as someone who got both the normal EU grants and one of the advanced grants of the European Research Council. And this is where perhaps we can look at the tensions that Roger introduced for us. And Helga is famous also for having engaged with the debate between Mode 1 and Mode 2 type of research. Let me explain in a second what it is. Mode 1 of research is the classic established notion of academic research, where you have a discipline with a theorist and you have individual researchers that engage with theory building and accumulate their own findings, they refine the theories, they refine the models. Model 2 research should be the type of research for contemporary world. It's problem driven, it's interdisciplinary, it has no, I would say, inbuilt respect for theories that can be hybridized, has more respect for action research networks or for a constellation of researchers and ideas that carry on research plans. The tension here is somewhat between some of the European programs, especially the non-European Research Council, that if you take them at face value, they really point towards Mode 2 research. They start with the problem, so you don't find calls for anything particularly theoretical. And the fact, so they are interdisciplinary and triggered by problems, and the fact that researchers, for their careers, they belong to a world of competition where the discipline is still somewhat sacrosanct. Helga, amongst many other things, has been chair of the International Benchmarking Panel for Sociology of the UK in 2009. It's been appointed, she was appointed in 2009. And clearly, if you are, I'm a political science, but I think it's the same for the sociologists, that the best you want to do is to publish in the best journals of your discipline. And typically interdisciplinary research does not make it to the most foundational, established, high-impact factor journals of your discipline. And here we see the difference that the ERC makes, because in a sense it alleviates the tension by funding research as defined by the researchers, so that there are no major programs, there are no problems already pre-identified for the scientists to work and say, well, you know, whoever you are, tell us what you can do to improve on the discipline as you see it. We're not asking you to engage with the problem that tomorrow the European Commission or the European Parliament have to solve. So I guess in a sense, if I look cynically at the ERC, is more mode 1 type of research, but there are ways of injecting then interdisciplinarity when you look at these outstanding and established researchers that supposedly apply for the ERC. But the two souls are present in different programs of the EU research policy. Another tension that is classic, at least in my experience, of the social science programs of the EU, and again, the ERC is important because it bucks the trend, it is different, is that this is the story, the tabloid story of funding for social sciences at the EU level, is that there are some governance innovations, and governance innovations in the end are policy instruments. There are new ways of doing things, so they ask the social scientists two important questions, important for the policymakers. And one is, are we designing the instruments the right way? That could be any instrument in governance, instrument for citizenship, for public policy, whatever. And the second question is, do the instruments or do the innovations that we create, we policymakers, perform well? So design and performance. Obviously, this is the kind of approach where, in a sense, you really drive down research to measuring the impact of whatever we have done. This clashes with what we know from social sciences research reflecting on themselves, that the most important evaluation is theory-driven. So, for example, you don't look simply at whether an instrument has been designed correctly or not, but what are the theories embedded in that policy instrument. You look at under which political, institutional conditions the policymakers implement, adopt an instrument or another. So you're looking also at, I would say, the percolation of different studies into the mindset of policymakers. There is a strong tension in the classic EU funding programs for knowledge utilization. Give us the measures and give us something we can use tomorrow. But actually, more important than the measures are reflections on why did they establish that type of instrument. And more important than what you should do tomorrow is accumulation of studies in one direction. For example, some simple ideas like airline deregulation or vouchers in schools, or even competition amongst universities, they were not established by any single study, but are, amongst other things, the result of thinking market-like, for example, in terms of higher education, airline, transport, and other things. Obviously, if there is a tension, if you have to demonstrate that your research will be used tomorrow morning and give usable knowledge in a small way, and what we think is more effective after having done many studies on knowledge utilization, which is this percolation of different studies into a main body of knowledge. And I just want to use the last extra 20 seconds to say that perhaps in this respect to the ERC seems different, because the kind of impact that is sought by the researchers that apply is somewhat different. It's not give us something we can use tomorrow, but give us something that perhaps redefines the terms of the debate, that redefines the problem, and therefore will then in some way contribute to a search for new solutions.
Thank you. I would like